So Ms. Ellison is texting.
Yeah, I mean, I already instructed you once to not include your commentary and just provide the facts.
And we are back, and we are back. Y'all go ahead and hit that like button for us. You know, when you do that, it really helps the channel out a lot. It helps us get out there in front of more people. And it's kind of like you saying thank you to us, and we're saying thank you to you. Today, the state calls their final 2 witnesses. You have Sprinkle, who comes back. I'm just going to show the cross-examination of Sprinkle. It's not that long. And then you have Detective Viverito. She did not want to show her face, y'all, but you can find out what she looks like if you just search her up online, because she's actually online. Now, I'm not going to do a whole lot of lead in. I just want to let y'all know something. There was big time problems today in the court with the volume. So I have turn this volume all the way up. So what I'm going to do is, you might need to turn your volume down for the first part, but at near the end, you're going to need to turn your volume all the way up in order to hear. I put a little icon. You're going to see this icon. When you need to turn your volume all the way up, you'll see the icon. But for now, you can maybe turn it down a little bit, because you don't want to blow your ears out, right? And one more thing, y'all, I'm putting a link to our new channel, Morbid Law Stories. We're going to be telling some really interesting and morbid law stories on another channel. We would definitely appreciate if you go subscribe, watch the couple of videos we have there. We're going to be uploading new videos every single day very soon. So check out Morbid Law Stories, link in the description. Other than that, thank y'all for rocking with us. Thank you for supporting us. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it.
Mr. Sprinkle.
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Sprinkle, I want to talk to you about the phone calls from the jail with my client, Shannon Stillwell, on them, okay?
Okay.
And I know you testified before about this briefly. How many total calls did you review involving Shannon Stillwell?
I don't know how many I reviewed. It would probably been around 30 to 50, somewhere in there. I downloaded over 700, though.
All right. The first call that we heard was 590Y. What date was that first call that we heard?
Well, if we're talking about today, it was October 31st, 2015.
Okay. And that was right after Mr. Stillwell had been, you're aware that Mr. Stillwell was a victim in a case where Tierra Jones was shot and killed.
Yes.
And you're aware that car that they were in, you're aware that the facts of that case was a car sped up behind the car that Tierra Jones was driving and shot a bunch of rounds into the back of the car that Shannon Stillwell, Tierra Jones, and Miss Duncan were in, correct?
That's what happened.
Okay. And Tierra Jones was tragically killed.
Yes.
And Shannon was severely injured, not from gunfire, but from the car flipping.
That's correct.
And he went to the hospital.
Yes.
Okay, so this call on October 31st, 2015 is within a day or two of Mr. Stillwell being released from the hospital. Well, let me back up. While at the hospital, he was served arrest warrants for the Donovan Thomas case.
I believe he was at the hospital at the time, yes.
Okay, and so this call is right after Mr. Stillwell was released from the hospital and is now in Fulton County Jail on those charges.
I don't know when he was released from the hospital, but given the timeline of when the Tierra Jones murder occurred and about when the arrest warrants were issued, I'll say that you're correct on that.
Okay. That first call, you hear Shannon speaking to a young lady.
Yes.
All right. Do you know who that is?
Betty Jean Jackson is what my notes state.
Okay. Well, Betty Jean Jackson is Mr. Stillwell's grandmother. That
Correct.
didn't sound like his grandmother, did it?
No, but that's the number that he called. That doesn't necessarily mean that's who he was speaking
Okay.
with,
Could he have been speaking to Yvette Barron?
Yes. That's very possible. He spoke with her very often.
All right. And that was a female friend of his?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in that first call we heard, you heard Mr. Stillwell, they were discussing representation, who was going to represent him on this very serious case in 2015.
Yes.
And Mr. Stillwell said something to the effect of, Thug sent a lawyer to visit me.
Yes.
Okay. And then Mr. Stillwell talks about that lawyer said he's worked with all sorts of stars and media cases before.
Yes.
And Mr. Stillwell is trying to figure out if he wants to entrust his life in his lawyer's hands.
Yes.
Okay. Who was the lawyer that met with Mr. Stillwell just before October 31st, 2015?
I don't recall.
Well, you have
If I ever knew, that is to say, if I ever knew to begin with, I may have, but I don't know now.
You have the ability to look in the Odyssey system to see what lawyers visit clients on a daily basis, correct?
Yes, but that's logged in the jail manager area, and in my experience, sometimes visits don't get logged.
Okay.
I don't. Well, I guess I can't say I don't know what's not logged, but there have been times when I either knew or suspected that an inmate received a visit, and I didn't see that it had been logged in Odyssey. But this visit may have been logged. I don't recall. If it was, it should still be in there.
Could it have been a Michael Bixon?
Yeah, that name sounds familiar. I think that you're right.
Okay. In fact, you know that Michael Bixon filed your office, the district attorney's office, did not indict this Donovan Thomas case, the alleged murder. You did not indict this case for several years.
That's right.
Okay, and several of those years, Mr. Stillwell was in jail, unindicted, charged with the Donovan Thomas homicide.
I don't know how long he was in jail, but it was certainly unindicted for a number of years.
You know that Mr. Bixon, on behalf of Mr. Stillwell, filed a constitutional speedy trial demand.
Objection, Your Honor, to the relevance to this.
Okay? Are you aware that Michael Bixon filed
objection, Your Honor.
motions?
Sustained.
Do you have any evidence that I, Max Shard, went to visit Mr. Stillwell in October 31st of 2015?
No, I don't believe it would have been you.
Okay. You don't have any evidence that I ever spoke to Mr. Stillwell before he was arrested on this RICO indictment in 2022, correct? You have no evidence of that.
I don't know who you were speaking with in October of 2022, or if you had spoken with him or you hadn't. I have no idea.
Okay. But you have no reason to believe that he was speaking about Thug sending me to see him in October 31st of 2015.
No, I don't think you would have been even in a position to represent him then, if I recall correctly.
Okay. Thank you. Now, moving on to the third call, November 23rd at 4:08 p.m. We hear Mr. Stillwell speaking to another man in that call, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And now, that was a day, there's a thing called preliminary hearings, correct?
Yes.
And preliminary hearings are when someone's arrested, the case is not indicted. There's a court date where an investigator comes in and testifies as to the evidence in the case.
That's usually, it doesn't have to be an investigator, but probably over 98% of the time it is.
Okay. And you're aware that Mr. Stillwell had a preliminary hearing on the Donovan Thomas case in November of 2015.
Yes.
Okay. Have you reviewed the transcript of that hearing?
No.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. In that hearing, it was Detective Thorpe who testified, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Kenneth Copeland didn't testify at that hearing.
No.
Okay. Quindarius Zachary did not testify at that hearing.
No.
Okay, so when Mr. Stillwell is talking about what happened at the hearing, he's not talking about what Kenneth Copeland or Quindarius Zachary said at the hearing. He's talking about what Detective Thorpe is testified that they said.
That's right.
Okay. Now, I want to be very clear on this. On that tape, Mr. Stillwell, and this was after his prelim was held, correct?
Yes.
This November 23rd phone call?
Yes.
In fact, it was right after his prelim was held.
I don't recall the exact date of the prelim. I remember it was in November, and given some of the contextual details of that call, it sounds like it was very close in time to this phone call that we listened to.
Okay, and that phone call we just listened to, the volume was a little low and the audio goes in and out a little bit. You would agree?
Yes.
Okay, I want to be very clear. Shannon, on that phone call to that other gentleman, says, little D, and this is right after the prelim, little D is saying that I said I did it, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
He did not say, let's just clear this up because the tape's not the best. He did not say, I told little D I did it.
That's right.
He did not say that. He merely said, little D is saying that I said I did it.
That's right.
Okay. Also in that tape, you hear Mr. Stillwell and this other gentleman talking about what's going on, the predicament that Mr. Stillwell is in, correct?
Yes.
Okay. The other gentleman says N-words trying to free themselves, correct?
That sounds right, yes.
They trying to get the heat off their ass.
Yes, that was said.
People trying to point fingers at others while not putting themselves at the scene.
Yeah, I believe that's a verbatim quote, yes.
Okay, and trying to free themselves, trying to get the heat off their ass. This is after Mr. Copeland gave statements against Mr. Stillwell on June 1st of 2015, right?
Yes.
And in the context of that interview, he was facing federal charges.
Mr. Copeland was, yes.
He was facing gun charges.
Yes.
He was facing theft charges for stolen merchandise that were in the mother of his child's apartment.
I don't recall that part.
Okay. Computers, where he was claiming Lil Mike and Quez.
I'm objecting to this. I don't know the relevance of that question.
You're not aware of, it's in evidence.
All right, then overruled.
You're not aware that Mr. Copeland tried to blame a Little Mike and Quez for stealing things that ended up in.
Hang on just a second. Are you saying whether he
I
knows,
should've-
whether this witness knows or not is not
I guess I should
relevant?
have said foundation, Your Honor.
Okay.
Okay, you don't have any knowledge of those things that Mr. Copeland said?
I don't remember that part of his
Okay.
statement now.
Okay. Also, trying to get the heat off their ass. The statement by Mr. Zachary claiming that Mr. Stillwell confessed to him. That was made when Mr. Zachary was in jail for shooting up several houses.
Yes.
And was facing federal straw purchasing charges as well.
Yes.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you.
Ms. Weinstein?
Good morning, Mr. Sprinkle.
Good morning.
Regarding the call that was played between Mr. Kendrick's mom, Tasha, and himself, you recall listening to that just now, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Kendrick says, do you hear the language about the mixtape about to drop in that call?
Yes.
Did you investigate that mixtape about to drop?
If I did, I don't recall now.
Okay. And associated with that, do you recall if associated with that mixtape is an image of my client wearing a bandana?
I do not.
Okay. But there is a reference in that call where my client informs his mother to change that bandana away from a certain color. I think he says a red color, correct?
That's right. That's what was said.
And given that the state seems fixated on seeing burgundy as red and orange as red,
Sustained.
do you think it's reasonable for my client to want a bandana viewed as red to be changed to another color?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Did you know that in your investigation, did you find my client being signed to Young Stoner Life Records in 2015?
I believe so. Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay. And then again, that mixtape being associated with that.
Yes, I believe. I don't recall exactly, but that sounds right.
Okay. There's also a reference in there of my client's mom, Miss Tasha, speaking to, I think she says speaking to Thug about a lawyer, correct?
Yes.
Do you have, and I believe it was Mr. Bixson that represented my client at the time, do you have any evidence that anyone other than my client retained? It's not Miss, anyway, let's forget it, whoever the lawyer was. Okay. That's okay. Thank you for your help. The lawyer that was retained for my client at the time, do you have any evidence that anyone other than my client retained that lawyer?
I don't know who paid for the attorney or, no, I don't have any evidence.
Okay. Would you find it unusual that somebody would ask a friend to recommend an attorney?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Redirect.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Deputy Sprinkle, as part of your current job, do you handle a number of preliminary hearings that was discussed on cross?
Yes.
And were you at that hearing that was referenced on cross-examination?
I believe so. If it was the same hearing in which Antonio Sledge his hearing was held, then yes, I was absolutely there. And I believe that Mr. Stillwell and Mr. Sledge, this was not over 9 years ago, or 9 years ago, most probably to the day. So I'm pretty sure I was there.
Now, on cross-examination, there was reference about the information at the preliminary hearing comes from, in this case, Detective Thorpe. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Now, if you remember, and there was reference about, on cross-examination, what Little D or someone said at that hearing. Do you recall that?
I do.
At that preliminary hearing, for witnesses who, such as Little D, were names used or were something else used?
Well, their legal names would have been used.
And is there any times in preliminary hearings where witnesses are referenced by something other than their name?
Sometimes. Yes, I'll often ask that the detective reference the witnesses by alphanumeric characters like A or 1, because there's a variety of reasons for it, but the basic reason is the case isn't indicted, and so we don't have to turn over the witness list yet, and we're still investigating, etc. And so the witness is not compelled or isn't required to recite the legal names or any name of the witness on the stand. Yes.
And if it's the hearing that you are thinking of, you said Antonio Sledge would have also been present?
Yes.
One brief moment, Your Honor. No further questions. Thank you, Deputy Sprinkle.
This prelim back in 2015, you don't have any recollection if actual names were used or like witness A, witness B, witness C?
I do not know.
Okay. And in the event that witness A, witness B, witness C were used, just hypothetically, the detective still testifies to the background of who these people are. such as, for instance, witness A, who we found receipts from a pawn shop showing that they purchased guns, said this, right? Or something of that nature. There's context behind these witness A, witness B, witness C.
Right. I mean, if you're saying that even if their names aren't used, if the detective provides enough detail regarding the circumstances surrounding the interview that one who is familiar with the witness could infer their identity from the testimony, then yes, that can happen.
You said that so much better than I did, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Ms. Weinstein? No, nothing more, Your Honor. All right. Thank you for your time, and you are excused. Yes, released.
Permanently excused.
Released. All right, let's take a quick break before our next witness, who I think might be a longer one.
All right, we're good.
All right, let's figure out this request for an instruction about dual capacity witnesses. Mr. Weinstein, I see what you originally requested. You don't seem to have been able to find what the judge determined, or maybe you did, but really just a second ago. Give me a second. Okay, anyway, you weren't able to find the language that the court apparently decided upon, and this is kind of a fish or cut bait point since we're about to have this witness on the stand. And I think Ms. Persfield has, just in the last few minutes requested if anybody has access to what exactly the language was to come up with it now, but in the absence of that, I think that what you originally requested, Mr. Weinstein, and I don't know if you want, I guess you filed that at some point, or do you want me to read it into the record?
You can read it into the record.
Okay.
I believe that was an email that was sent to the court back on January 31st.
Your request is that the court instruct the jury the testimony you're about to hear is the witness's opinion based on training and experience, not firsthand knowledge, and that it is for the jury to determine how much weight, if any, to give that opinion. And then after the witness has testified in the dual capacity, to say, you have heard the testimony of this witness who testified to both facts and opinions. Each of these types of testimony should be given the proper weight. As to the testimony to facts, consider the factors discussed earlier in these instructions. As to the testimony on opinions, you do not have to accept the opinion. In deciding how much weight to give it, you should consider the witness's qualifications and how the witness reached their conclusions, along with other factors discussed in these instructions for weighing the credibility of witnesses. One problem with that is we don't have whatever those prior instructions that whomever this court would have given. So it would be a little not helpful to give them that instruction.
Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm very close to finding the instruction. I found the state's previous when Detective Belt that.
Okay.
So I'm going to forward that to the defense counsel in the court, and I think near that time, I'm hoping to see another email of what the court actually did. But this is the state's previous proposal.
That would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Adkins. I believe that's around January 31st, 2023. So I'm looking.
I mean, in the event we can't find it, I've tried to fashion something that might work, but first of all, I guess we can see whether it can be located.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Quickly. Oh. All right, and if either defendant needs to be excused to the restrooms while the attorneys are looking, y'all can go ahead and do that. I'm going to do the same, and I'll be right back. Is some of the testimony you're about to hear will be this witness's opinion as an expert based on training and experience, not her firsthand knowledge as a fact witness. Other testimony will be as the so-called fact information gleaned during the witness's investigation. I've instructed the state to the extent possible to try to make clear when they're asking for or when the witness is giving expert opinion versus fact testimony. I'll just recall to you the instructions previously given about how to evaluate fact testimony, lay opinion testimony, if there is any from this witness, and expert opinion testimony. Y'all want anything beyond that? Okay, great. Are we ready for the jury? Okay. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, a guilty plea conviction is about to be admitted in this case. A guilty plea conviction of Mr. Kendrick will be admitted for your consideration, and it may be considered by you only against Mr. Kendrick and only as to counts 1 and 63. And let me also take this opportunity to instruct you about the guilty plea convictions of Mr. Stillwell, which had already previously been admitted for your consideration. Those convictions may be considered by you only against Mr. Stillwell and only as to counts 1, 52, and 64. You may not use the conviction of Mr. Kendrick in your consideration or deliberations against Mr. Stillwell. They are not evidence of anything against Mr. Stillwell. And likewise, you may not use the convictions of Mr. Stillwell in your consideration or deliberations against Mr. Kendrick. They are not evidence of anything against Mr. Kendrick. Each defendant has a right to have his guilt or innocence determined solely on the basis of the evidence presented against him, not by what may have happened with regard to a criminal prosecution of someone else. And there were also guilty plea convictions of Mr. Nichols admitted previously. For the reasons that I just explained, those convictions would have been admissible only against Mr. Nichols and not any other defendant. And because Mr. Nichols is no longer a part of this prosecution and his convictions would have only been admissible against him, there is no longer a reason for them to be in evidence, and you are not to consider them for any reason in your deliberations and in reaching your verdict. And you also heard testimony about a guilty plea by Mr. Winfrey. Whether Mr. Winfrey pled guilty to something is also not to be considered against any of these defendants. This proposition is true about the guilty plea convictions of any co-defendant. And again, that's because each defendant has the right to have his guilt or innocence determined solely on the basis of the evidence presented against him and not by what may have happened with regard to a criminal prosecution of someone else.
Thank you, Your Honor. And Your Honor, this time the state would like to tender State's Exhibit 438 VV pursuant to 24-9-902, which is a self-authenticating certified copy of conviction of Mr. Diamante Kendrick in indictment 15 SC 140116, where Mr. Kendrick pled guilty to participation in criminal street gang activity, conspiracy to commit a crime, possession of a firearm or knife during the commission of or attempt to commit certain felonies, theft by receiving stolen property, VGCSA for the purchase, possession of a controlled substance in Schedule 1 or Schedule 2, driving, fleeing, and attempting to elude, and possession of a marijuana less than an ounce.
All right, that is admitted. And you can call your next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Investigator Viverito.
All right. And while that investigator is making her way to the stand, I'm going to give you another instruction. And this is kind of just a reminder instruction. So some of the testimony you're about to hear from this witness will be the witness's opinion as an expert based on training and experience, not her knowledge as a fact witness. But other testimony she's going to give will be so-called fact information gleaned during the witness's investigation. I've instructed this, go ahead. I've instructed the state to the extent possible to try to make it clear when they're asking for or when the witness is giving expert opinion versus fact testimony. And I'll just recall to you the instructions that were previously given before another expert's testimony that was going to testify in a dual capacity about how to evaluate fact testimony, lay opinion testimony, if there is going to be any from this witness, and then expert opinion testimony. All right, thank you. And if you can swear the witness.
Raise your right hand. You swear firm testimony to give the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
State and spell your first and last name for the courts. I'm sorry. First initial, last name for the courts, okay?
Sure. It would be M. Viverito, Viverito.
And good morning, Investigator Viverito. How are you?
Good morning, I'm well.
Where do you work?
The City of Atlanta Police Department.
And how long have you worked for the City of Atlanta Police Department?
Since February of 2023.
And what are your current job duties and responsibilities with the City of Atlanta Police Department?
Currently, I hold the rank of investigator, and my position is unique. It's the first of its kind for the Atlanta Police Department. It's a move towards intelligence-led investigations. So my official title is an investigative gang analyst. That is where it's basically a hybrid between a detective and a criminal intelligence analyst. So you're fusing the best parts of both worlds to move investigations forward, especially in the gang world.
And when you said intelligence-led investigation, just tell the jury briefly, what do you mean?
Intelligence-led investigations where you think outside the box. So it's not just, okay, maybe some camera footage, talking to some people. You're using everything at your disposal, whether it be social media accounts, jail calls, phone extractions, wiretaps, everything. You're going to try and get everything you can from the intelligence world and do your research and bring that all in together than just traditional investigative techniques.
Prior to working at Atlanta Police Department, where did you work?
Start from the beginning?
No, just
Okay.
immediately prior.
Prior to the Atlanta Police Department, I was with the Fulton County District Attorney's Office in their gang unit. I was a senior investigator, and then I was ultimately promoted to a lieutenant in the high-profile case unit.
And let's first talk about your time as a senior investigator. Tell the jury about your job duties and responsibilities as a senior investigator in the gang unit.
So I would work with various attorneys in the unit, and I would review cases that were coming up for trial or being prepared for indictment, and I'd take a look at the file, and we'd see if there was anything that was needed to push the case forward. We may go talk to people, we may locate witnesses, we may secure additional search warrants, and just get the case ready and be trial ready for when it ultimately goes to trial or takes a plea.
And as a lieutenant, what did you do when you were with the high-profile unit?
It was things of a similar nature, but it was a little bit more, again, as the title would allude to, high-profile cases, media cases, cases that involve difficult witnesses, in cases that were a little bit more complex.
Now, prior to working at the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, did you work for any other law enforcement agency?
I did.
If you could tell the jury about your career in law enforcement.
Sure. I graduated from the University of Tampa with a bachelor's degree in criminology. I did about a year down in Tampa working at a juvenile facility to get some experience. Then after that, I moved to Atlanta. I started my career with the Georgia Department of Corrections as a felony probation officer. While I was there, my career has exclusively been in the city of Atlanta. While I was there, I started out with a normal caseload. Shortly after that, they started a program what was called the Atlanta Community Impact Program. It was a pilot program driven to reduce recidivism for people returning back to the community from prison. So somebody may get sentenced to a prison sentence that includes probation. So they partnered us with every day we were partnered with Atlanta police officers. We would ride with them. They would come with us to do home visits. So we'd get a list of returning citizens from prison, and we'd offer wraparound services. So if you need a job, if you need housing, if you need clothing, if you need education, if you need anything you need, we offer it there as like kind of a one-stop shop in an effort to reduce recidivism. So on the other hand, then, if you want to get out of prison and say, you know what, not interested, I'd like to engage in a crime spree, thanks. We have the Atlanta Police Department with us every day to say, okay, we're going to stop that before you get hurt or before anybody else gets hurt. Anybody in the community is
I want you to slow down a little because you are going so
Sorry.
fast, and I will ask a different question further. All right. While you were with probation, did you ever have an opportunity to work with the GBI?
Yes, later on in my career.
Okay. So when did you work with the GBI later on in your career?
Okay, several years later, I was promoted to probation and parole has there are different ranks. I was promoted to a criminal investigator. So what's that? You don't have a caseload. You're operating as a
Slow down.
Sorry. You're operating as a law enforcement officer within probation and parole. Typically, you're assigned to the Special Operations Division, and then you're assigned to either a federal task force. In my case, I was assigned to the GBI Gang Task Force. That's the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. It's a statewide gang task force.
And what did you do when you were part of the GBI Gang Task Force?
Although we were statewide, my experience was here in the city of Atlanta, so I took on
This is her training to qualify her as an expert in gang.
Do you want to stipulate to it? To her expertise? I mean, you may.
So specifically going into what you were doing with the GBI Gang Task Force. You can continue.
Okay. So we had agents some agents like to work in North Georgia, some South Georgia. I was familiar with the city of Atlanta. So during my time there, I investigated several complex, multi-defendant gang cases that were focused on violence within the city of Atlanta.
And in additional, do you have any formal training that you've taken to assist you in identifying gangs here in the city of Atlanta?
Sure. Back when I first started, there's a 40-hour course down at the Georgia Public Safety Training Center that you take as kind of a introductory course down there. I completed that. I'm also a member of the Georgia Gang Investigators Association and completed the beginner and intermediate certification through them. I attend there. They have a biannual conference, a summer and a winter typically, where it's a week full of just training. Every year the topics vary. They bring people in from all over the country to teach. I attend both of those. I attend various trainings throughout the year and just keeping myself abreast of the topics and trends in the gang world.
And just briefly tell the jurors, what type of courses are you taking in these training sessions?
It just depends what they offer at the time. It could be best practices in gang investigations. It could be technology focused. It could be narcotics focused. It could be focused on street crime enforcement. They try to keep a good variety so their members are well versed and have a well-rounded training background.
Yeah.
Investigator Viverito, could we use?
Can you pull that? Yeah, it worked great for a minute, and I don't know what happened, but just pull that mic towards you. Yeah.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
In addition to your formal training, do you have any other training or experience to assist you in identifying criminal street gangs and determining gang culture?
I'd say my experience here in the city of Atlanta, working here, my career has been exclusively here. Probation and parole gave me a great knowledge base to start my career. I do have a lot of in custody and custodial, non-custodial interviews with people. I like to talk to people. People talk to me. And I do listen to a lot of jail calls, I feel they're great to get information, phone extractions, wiretap calls. You kind of learn from the gangs themselves.
And you just talked about speaking with individuals. At your time, have you had the opportunity to speak with gang members and or their family members while you've been working in law enforcement?
Yes. Multiple times I've talked to gang members. I've talked to the mothers of their children, their mothers, their grandmothers, brothers, sisters. Sometimes I remember one time recently I was out at a crime scene and somebody's sister came up to me and said, "Hey, how you doing?"
Sustained.
Let me ask you this. Do you gain information to assist you in your investigations with your cases?
Absolutely.
And then you talked about jail calls and wiretaps, and listening to those jail calls and information you get from the wiretaps or intercepted calls. Does that help provide you information to assist you with your knowledge of gangs and gang investigation?
It does.
Now, as your time as an investigator and working in all of your law enforcement capacities, have you had the opportunity to use social media to assist you in your investigation?
I have.
How does social media assist you in your investigations?
So typically in the past with gangs, graffiti used to kind of be the newspaper for the gang. You'd go to neighborhoods and you'd look at graffiti and see who's been dead or who they're disrespecting, who's claiming the territory. Now, modern day, that's all basically shifted to social media. It allows you to still do that and not assume much of the risk that you have standing out there doing those kind of things. Gangs love social media, and it's probably one of the most important things you need to pay attention to in gang investigations.
Now, do you use certain tools in order to assist you with investigation that the general public does not have access to?
Yes.
What are some of those tools?
Of course, we have our jail call system. We have phone extractions are a huge, huge thing. So any cell phones that we recover during arrests and we secure a search warrant, I'll have them extracted by a qualified examiner. Interviews that wouldn't be available to the general public, the access to certain people. There's a lot of people that I've talked to that not everybody has access to talk to. So there's several things.
As a gang detective with Atlanta Police Department, were you trained in the method and protocol of the Atlanta Police Department in determining whether or not a person is in either associated or a member of a criminal street gang?
Yes.
Now, when you were with the other agencies, were you trained in other methods or protocols to determine whether or not a person is either associated with or a member of a criminal street gang?
Yes, the different agencies have their different methods, but yes.
As an investigator, have you had the opportunity through your work in Atlanta to interact with persons who claimed association with a gang called Young Slime Life?
Yes.
Can you just tell the jury generally about your interactions with individuals regarding the Young Slime Life gang?
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Let me just ask generally, then I'll go specifically. Have you had conversations with individuals who are a member of Young Slime Life?
Yes.
Have you had the opportunity on occasion to view social media accounts of individuals who claim affiliation with Young Slime Life?
Yes.
Have you had the opportunity to listen to jail calls of individuals who associate themselves with Young Slime Life?
Yes.
And have you had the opportunity to intercept phone calls with individuals who associate themselves with Young Slime Life?
Yes.
Now, I want to ask you, through your work as well in Atlanta, have you had the opportunity to interact with individuals who claimed association with a gang called YFN?
Yes, I have.
And I ask the same series of questions. Have you had the opportunity to listen to jail calls of individuals who associate themselves with YFN?
Yes, I helped investigate and was part of the team for the YFN RICO indictment, and jail calls were an integral part of our investigation.
And we're going to talk about that indictment in a moment. Have you had the opportunity to look at social media of individuals who claim affiliation with YFN?
Yes.
And what about interception of cellular phone calls? Have you had that opportunity with individuals associated with YFN?
Not as YFN as the target, but it's happened with other cases.
And when you say not with YFN as a target, what do you mean?
When you intercept phone calls, you have a target phone number that you're intercepting the calls from. I haven't had a wiretap case. I've done a few of them. I haven't had one where a YFN person was a target.
Now, through your working with YSL and YFN, have you had the occasion to learn about alliances with both YFN and YSL?
Yes.
Now, I think you mentioned briefly GGIA, but if you can explain to the jury, what is GGIA?
That's the Georgia Gang Investigators Association. Many of us are members and we attend the conferences. They offer great trainings and certifications throughout the year. And like I said, they have they have a winter and a summer conference. You can go there, you can meet gang experts from throughout the country will come present and just learn from a variety of experienced individuals.
And I think briefly you mentioned, have you had the opportunity to teach courses in gangs?
I have.
What type of courses have you taught?
I serve as an adjunct instructor for the Georgia Gang Investigators Association. Typically, I teach social media investigations and advanced investigative techniques.
Now, you talked about the fact that you listen to a lot of jail calls. You've intercepted cellular calls on wiretaps. I mean, you've had the ability to review cell phone data that's been extracted from cell phones. Did those interactions with technology and communication with gang members, looking at jail calls and those items, did that help you gain any knowledge into coded languages that gang members may use?
Absolutely.
Have you had any training on gangs and music?
I've had, at the Georgia Gang Investigators Association, I believe a few years ago, they had some blocks on music and gangs.
And have you had the occasion in your experience to investigate gangs with people who have ties to the music industry?
I have. In Atlanta, it is very common.
And is YSL and YFN both of those gangs that you've been able to investigate?
Yes.
And have you listened to music of individuals associated with both those gangs, both YSL and YFN?
I have.
And are you familiar with gang references in music?
I am.
Your Honor, this time the state would like to tender Investigator Viverito as a witness, as an expert in criminal street gangs and criminal street gang activity, Your Honor.
All right. She's so qualified and may testify as an expert in those areas.
Now, while you've either been at Atlanta Police Department or the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, have you had the opportunity to lead any gang investigations?
I have.
And specifically, I want to direct your attention to this particular case, this indictment here, where you wanted to lead investigators on this indictment when you were at the Fulton County District Attorney's Office.
Yes, I was.
Now, as an investigator on this case, did you have the occasion to investigate any crimes involving an individual by the name of Marquavius Huey?
I did.
And specifically, did you investigate an armed robbery that occurred in October of 2020?
I did.
All right. How did you get involved in that investigation?
Prior to coming to the DA's office, when I was at the GBI Gang Task Force, my office was at the Atlanta Police Department's headquarters in their gang unit, so I was very familiar with all the detectives and the different units up there. I was approached by a detective, Jeffrey Henderson, from the robbery unit regarding a robbery case involving Mr. Huey that he had.
And when he approached you, what, if any, steps did you assist him when he approached you?
I did.
What steps did you take to assist him with that investigation?
Just identifying Mr. Huey's gang involvement, who he was affiliated with, who he would have had alliances with, who he would have had rivalries with, things of that nature.
And how did you go about assisting to identify Huey's relationships with any gang involvement?
Well, the first thing I did was review Mr. Huey's social media accounts. The name has changed a few times, but when I reviewed it, it was Mr. Huey's very proud of his affiliation with Young Slime Life.
Yep. Sustained. Don't provide commentary like that, okay? Just if you're testifying to facts, just give us the facts. Disregard that last comment.
So just what were some of his names?
JBS Quay for Jonesboro South Quay. I can't remember the rest of them off the top of my head, but he would change. It changed a few times.
And when you looked at his social media, did you also do any other investigation to assist Investigator Henderson?
When Investigator Henderson, following Mr. Huey's arrest, obtained his cellular devices, Investigator Henderson did a search warrant for his devices with a scope of 30 days. So what that means is when the phone is extracted, it's permissible to review 30 days worth of data. I think the time frame was just around the time of the robbery. Within that time frame, there were additional crimes and evidence in the phone. I secured search warrants to expand the scope of what was allowed to be searched to the entire phone, on 2 phones.
And once you were able to secure a search warrant, did you then look into the phone, the expanded phone?
I did.
And in preparation for your testimony today, have you had the opportunity to look at some of the contents in that phone?
I have.
You want permission to approach?
You may.
Permission?
You may.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 227 VV2A, 227 VV2B, 227 VV2C, and 227 VV2D. If you can look at those and tell me if you recognize those items.
Sure. Yes, I recognize them.
And how do you recognize them?
They are text messages that were extracted from Mr. Huey's phone, his phones, as well as 2 contacts that were stored in the phone.
Okay. And those appear to be accurate depictions of text messages and the contacts that were in the phone that you reviewed back in 2020.
They do.
Right. Your Honor, this time the state would like to admit State's Exhibit 227 VV2A, 227 VV2B, 227 VV2C, and 227 VV2D into evidence.
Admitted.
Now, Investigator Viverito, when looking through the phone, well, let me ask you this. Prior to getting involved with this investigation with Marquavius Huey, did you have any knowledge of any beefs between YFN and YSL?
Yes, since 2015, YSL and YFN had an ongoing conflict.
Overruled.
And when you were working with the GBI task force in 2020, did you have knowledge of that beef?
I did.
All right. Now, when you looked inside of Mr. Huey's phone, did you see any conversations in his phone regarding an individual by the name of Lucci?
I did.
Okay. And generally, what information was in the phone that you saw about an individual Lucci? What did you see in the phone?
I would see that when Lucci or Mr. Rayshawn Bennett, when Mr. Bennett would have there was a handful of performances or appearances within the city of Atlanta. The flyer would be shared either by Mr. Williams or Mr. Huey, and Mr. Huey would talk about going to handle that, and would be told or asked to go handle that.
And you said he would be talking to Mr. Williams. How did you know, when you're saying Mr. Williams, who are you referring to?
Jeffrey Williams, also known as Young Thug.
How did you know he was speaking with Jeffrey Williams?
Based on the phone numbers that he was in communication with, as well as how they were named in the phone, but the phone numbers themselves.
I'm going to first show you what's been admitted as 227 VV2C.
Okay.
And it should come up on your screen in a moment. Now, first, looking at 227 VV2C, what is the jury looking at?
You're looking at when you extract a phone. If you go to your address book in your phone, you'll pull up contacts or a contact card. This is what it looks like when the phone is extracted. When you receive it back on a hard drive and you're going through the phone, this is what it's going to appear as. So you may have mom, a phone number, and that information. This is how it appears in a forensic phone extraction.
And for 227 VV2C, do you see a name associated with this contact?
Yes.
And what is the name?
It's named Slime, and it has some emojis with the name.
Okay. And are you able to tell what the emojis are?
It looks like a snake emoji, and I don't know if you guys can see. It should be like the iPhone emoji.
And then in this phone, when it says deleted, do you know what that means?
I would assume that I don't see it on my copy where it says deleted.
Where it says deleted in the left-hand column?
Oh, okay. There you go. So, yeah, that would be, I would assume that means that contact was deleted or removed from the device at some point, but still stored in the memory of the device somewhere.
Okay. And where it has other, what is in the other category?
That would be the number associated with that contact.
All right. And then for the created category, what's the created category?
That's going to be the date that the contact was added to the phone. So say you meet somebody, you add their contact to your phone, you put them in your address book, that's going to be that date.
Okay. And then if it was modified, what does that mean?
Modified could be you change their name, you add a last name, you delete the contact, or you modify the number in any way.
All right. And what was the phone number associated with this contact in the phone?
213-910-1192.
Now I'm going to also show you 227 VV2D.
Okay.
First, I want to start with the other. What is the phone number associated with this contact?
213-910-1192.
And is that the same phone number from 227 VV2C?
It is.
Right. And when you look at the name, what is in the name section?
So here, it's going to appear as almost like a bug type emoji, but I had a chance to review the physical device. It is a spider emoji. That's just how it translates to, I don't know if you have friends, if you have an iPhone, your friend is the Android, sometimes the emojis don't translate correctly. When you extract the phone, that's what happens here. So when you look at the physical device, it's going to be a spider.
And then what was the created and modified date on 227 VV2D?
March 1st of 2019 is created and modified November 22nd of 2020.
And through your investigation, did you associate this contact with an individual?
I did.
And who was that?
Jeffrey Williams.
All right. Now I'm going to publish 227 VV2A.
Okay.
And I want to go to slide 2. What's being depicted in slide 2? And if we can zoom in, because I know it's pretty tiny.
So, just like in your phone when you send a message, typically the message you're sending is going to be in green for iPhones, blue if the sent recipient has an iPhone. It's going to be on the right-hand side of the conversation. What that is going to be is it's a flyer for a YFN Lucci performance or appearance.
Okay. And who sent the flyer, and to whom did the flyer get sent to?
Mr. Huey sent that flyer to Mr. Williams.
Right. And looking at slide 3, in the middle, what is in the middle? Is that this attachment of what the flyer is?
Yes.
Now looking at slide number 3, is that the attachment?
It is.
All right. And for the record, what does the attachment say?
It is a flyer. I think it was a performance or an appearance. It was a mixtape release for Mr. Bennett at the Diamond Club, which, from my experience with other investigations, is a YFN stronghold.
And if you need to, you can use the screen
Okay.
to help point out as well.
Yeah, so you'll see it's just he's saying he has a mixtape release, and this is at the Diamond Club on Northside Drive.
Now looking at slide 3.
Okay.
Slide 4, excuse me. Starting at slide 4. And if you can either read from the screen behind you or from your paper, or read from the screen behind you, and so we can show the jury. Tell the jurors about the conversation that is happening as a result of this flyer.
So it's a little confusing, but at the time, if you look at the time and dates these messages are sent, the flyer and the initial conversation is started on Mr. Williams' phone that has a 213 area code or a Los Angeles area code. Once the flyer is sent by Mr. Huey, Mr. Williams switches to his Atlanta phone number, and they engage in conversation to where Mr. Williams tells him, handle that tonight, and follows it up with slat. And then Mr. Huey responds, slat.
And you said that this was Mr. Williams' Atlanta number. On the left-hand side, it says slime. Would that be the contact, how the contact is saved in Mr. Huey's phone?
Yes, that's how it would appear in the phone.
And what is the Atlanta phone number?
It is 404-789-1371.
And what is the date, roughly the date and times of these text messages?
January 19th, 2020.
Now going to page 5. What is being depicted on slide 5 of this PowerPoint?
That is Mr. Williams using his Atlanta number to tell Mr. Huey on August 15th of 2020, go handle that, and he responds, slat.
Now, looking at page 6, or slide 6, excuse me. Now, is this September 2nd, 2020?
It is.
Okay. And what is occurring in this text message conversation beginning on September 2nd, 2020?
Okay, so several months later, Mr. Huey is going to send another flyer for a YFN Lucci appearance or performance. And Mr. Williams responds, where's that at? Mr. Huey tells him Claremont. Mr. Williams responds and says, "Slatty handle, stay very low." And Mr. Huey says, "Slat, for sure, I've been out the way."
And looking at the next slide, is this a copy of that flyer?
Yes, it is.
And when is the date of the appearance that Mr. Bennett is advertising?
September 6th.
Right. Now, going to the next slide. Does that conversation continue?
It does.
Okay. And if you could say for the record what the conversation is as it continues.
Mr. Huey tells Mr. Williams, "I appreciate you for everything, my brother. Never about money with me. I'm built on loyalty." He sends the 100 emoji, which kind of means like, I'm for real about it. Mr. Williams says, "Slat, handle that, I got you." Mr. Huey responds, "Slat."
Now, going to the next slide, is there some additional conversation now with the 213 number that's identified as Spider or Mr. Williams?
There is.
Okay. And when is this conversation?
July 20th of 2020.
Okay. So this is after the first Lucci conversation, but before the second Lucci conversation.
Yes.
All right. And what is occurring in this conversation?
Mr. Huey sends, in the first message, you see an attachment. It's a video clip of a friend that wanted really bad. He was like trying to get his career off the ground as a rapper here in Atlanta. He says, "Post this for me, my brother." And then he uses a derogatory term for somebody and says, "That person's out here in LA, twin." Not referring to his friend, he's referring to somebody else, somebody of the opposition, it appears.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the speculation.
Sustained.
Yes. And is that just generally the context of this conversation?
Correct.
All right. I want to move to the next slide. I'm sorry, the next slide. Specifically, on this slide, do you see a message with an individual by the name of Javon Fleetwood?
I do.
And are you familiar with that individual?
I am.
And how are you familiar with that individual?
He's a member of YSL.
Okay. And as a part of your investigation, have you had the occasion to investigate a shooting involving Mr. Fleetwood, where he is been charged with aggravated assault?
Yeah, I wasn't the lead investigator, but I had a chance to review the investigation.
Okay. And did you have an opportunity to prep that case for trial at any point?
I did.
Right. What were the charges that he was preparing for to go to trial on?
I believe it was aggravated assault.
Okay. And do you know the approximate date of the incident in which he was being charged with?
I believe it was May 10th of 2019.
Okay. And in that May 10th, 2019, was there a vehicle associated with that ag assault?
There was.
Well, we haven't heard it yet, but avoid hearsay.
Yes. As a part of your investigation, when you were investigating that case for trial.
I'm going to object to hearsay.
Don't elicit hearsay.
I won't elicit hearsay.
Because right now it sounds like she's testifying as a fact witness, right?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Did you get social media account for Mr. Fleetwood?
I didn't obtain records for it, but I reviewed some posts from his account.
From his public account?
Correct.
And have you had the opportunity to view those posts prior to your testimony today?
I have.
Right. Tell me if you recognize 479 VV.
I do.
And how do you recognize 479 VV?
That's a photo of Mr. Javon Fleetwood from his Instagram account.
And is that from his public Instagram account?
It is.
Right. And was that pulled in preparation for this indictment here that we are referencing, 22 SC 183572?
It was.
Right. Your Honor, this time the state would like to tender and admit 478 VV into evidence.
Admitted.
Oh, excuse me, 479 VV.
All right. Admitted.
And we'll publish that in a moment. Based on your investigation, do you know if Mr. Huey and Mr. Fleetwood had a friendship?
Yes.
And had you seen any public social media accounts with both Mr. Fleetwood and Mr. Huey in those together?
I believe there were a few posts of them together that I reviewed.
And is that Mr. Fleetwood?
That is.
Okay. And what was his Instagram name?
_TV World.
And I want to zoom into his face. Do you see any tattoos? Do you see any tattoos on Mr. Fleetwood's face?
I do.
And specifically, do you see the tattoo with the star?
I do.
What is the tattoo next to the tattoo with the star?
So down the right side of his face by his temple, you'll see he has YSL tattooed on the right side of his face.
And now I'll go back to the next set of the former State's Exhibit 227 VV2A. Now I want to go to this conversation that starts on February 25th, 2020.
Okay.
Who is Mr. Huey speaking with?
Mr. Williams using his Los Angeles area code phone number.
And looking at this post, generally, what is the context of this text message conversation?
He sends a social media post of somebody else to Mr. Williams and says, "What's up with him? Is he cool?"
Okay. And then what was his next message to Mr. Williams' phone?
He's inquiring if the gentleman is cool, it looks, because he says he posted that racial expletive, Bloody J.
And are you familiar with that name or individual, Bloody J?
Yes.
Okay. And are you aware if he's associated with any gang?
Yes.
What gang is that?
He's associated with the YFN, or Atlanta Blood Gang, criminal street gangs.
And do you know Bloody J's given name?
Yes, it's Justin Ushery.
And have you had any investigation involving Mr. Ushery?
I have.
And then did Mr. Williams respond to his to Mr. Huey's inquiry?
He says, "Who is that?" To which Mr. Huey responds, "Duct Tape Dave."
And are you familiar with the individual by the name of Duct Tape Dave?
Yes.
How are you familiar with that name?
He's a pretty prominent guy within the Duct Tape criminal street gang.
Okay. And then was there a response to that?
It was.
Oh, and what was that?
Mr. Williams says, "He's a buster too," to which Mr. Huey responds, "Slat." And he tells Mr. Williams, "I told him, fuck them, racial expletive. He hit me back laughing and shit."
Now I want to go to a tweet that begins on March 12th, 2020.
Okay.
Now, what is going on within this group of text messages on March 12th, 2020?
Mr. Williams initiates a conversation with Mr. Huey.
Okay. And what does Mr. Williams say in his initiation?
What y'all got going on?
Okay. And then is there a response?
He says, "Them, racial expletive, no, I ain't play no part in that slime."
All right. And then is there a response from Mr. Williams back to Mr. Huey?
He says, "Take that shit back."
And is there a response from Mr. Huey back to Mr. Williams?
Mr. Huey says, I ain't get nothing out of that. I ain't even pull no gun on nobody. I'm finna tell them, though.
All right. And does he make another response?
He said, I told them I ain't finna do that shit. He went on and did it. I couldn't stop him.
And then does Mr. Williams respond to that?
Mr. Williams says, if he don't take it back, he's gonna die.
And looking at this text message, without going into detail, were you aware of any police reports around this event of March 12, 2020?
Objection, I hear, sir.
Overruled.
Were you aware of any police reports regarding any incidents around this date?
I was.
Okay. Now, I want to go to 227 VV2B. And in looking at 227 VV2B, was there a text message on November 14, 2021?
There was.
Okay. And who sent the message?
Mr. Huey sends the message to Mr. Williams' LA area code phone number.
Okay. And what does the message say?
It says, you know, I'm ready to handle the business and go sit down if I got to about any one of y'all on my mama.
Now I'm going to approach, I'm going to show you what's been marked as 428 VV. Tell me if you recognize Stacey Dibbitt 428 VV.
I do.
And how do you recognize Stacey Dibbitt 428 VV?
This is a photo from Mr. Huey's public Instagram account.
And is that, what was his account name?
__ Quay1.
And were you familiar with that Instagram post for Mr. Huey?
I was.
And were you able to pull that Instagram post in preparation for this case here today?
I was.
You know, at this time, the state would like to tender tender 428 VV into evidence.
I'm sorry, 28?
428 VV.
Okay. Admitted.
And permission to publish.
You may.
And who is depicted in this picture?
That's going to be Mr. Huey standing with Mr. Williams.
And is there a caption?
There is.
What's the caption?
It reads, from lockdown to a jet, slap biz.
And is there a date to that post?
September 4th.
Now, in looking at Mr. Huey's phone, we talked about there being this ongoing beef with YFN since about 2015. And in Mr. Huey's phone, there is information about Mr. Huey going to go handle business and sending those flyers.
Correct?
Between 2019 and 2020, was there any ongoing conflict or continuous ongoing conflict between YFN and YSL?
Yes.
Okay. And through your investigation, were you made aware of incidents that occurred between 2019 and 2020 between those two groups?
Yes, several.
How did you learn about those incidents?
In 2019, when I was working, at that time, I wasn't yet promoted to the gang task force, so I was assigned to the Atlanta Police Department's gang unit as a probation officer with a gang caseload. So I worked on their investigations with them. And then in 2020, when I was with the GBI gang task force, I worked some of the actual investigations.
Specifically, did you ever work an investigation regarding a May 2019 incident involving YFN Lucci or Mr. Rayshawn Bennett?
I was aware of the incident, but I was not an investigator on it.
Okay. Did you investigate any shots fired call from May 22nd, 2019 in the Cleveland Avenue area?
Yes.
How were you involved in that investigation?
Can I refer to a timeline?
Yes.
That was an incident where shots fired at the YSL stronghold located at 151 Cleveland Ave.
Sounds like we're reading off the report, and I'm going to ask you to
Sustained.
Are you familiar with 151 Cleveland Avenue?
I am.
How are you familiar with 151 Cleveland Avenue?
That's a known location where YSL members hang out, sell narcotics, congregate.
And have you had your own opportunity to investigate crimes that occurred in that area of 151 Cleveland?
I have.
Now, I want to take you to 2020. Did you have the occasion to investigate any specific incidents involving YFN incidents towards YSL members or YSL members towards YFN members?
I did.
Okay. In 2020, how many such incidents did you yourself were part of the investigation?
There were numerous incidents that we worked on as a team.
And in 2020, were there a lot of back and forth shootings between those two groups or associates of those two groups?
Yes, almost daily.
In 2020, were there also social media posts of antagonizing between one group, posting on social media, antagonizing the other group?
Yes.
Do you know of an individual by the name of Tinquarius Mender?
I do.
How do you know that individual? How are you aware of that individual?
I want to make sure I answer that. Is it okay to answer?
Let me ask you this. Is Mr. Mender associated with YSL?
He is.
Have you seen social media posts of Mr. Mender driving around in YFN territory?
Yes, he would post himself driving around, and he would tag, in case you didn't recognize it from sight, he would tag Summerhill.
And why would that be considered antagonizing for Mr. Mender to be driving around in Summerhill?
Because Mr. Member was also a member of YSL.
In 2020, did you have the occasion to investigate a case involving Mr. Mender and Mr. Diamante Thomas at Greenbrier Mall?
Yes, but I think it was Dontavius Thomas.
Excuse me, Dontavius Thomas. Are you aware if Dontavius Thomas is related to Donovan Thomas?
Yes.
How are they related?
I believe it's his brother.
How were you involved in the investigation regarding Mr. Mender and Dontavius Thomas?
At that time, like I said, there was a conflict. The conflict had reignited. So almost daily, every day we had incidents happening. I remember that day we were at work, we got a call about a vehicle that was fired upon while it was driving on the highway, and it had flipped over, had two victims inside the vehicle. Myself and Investigator Storno of the Atlanta Police Department's gang unit began to look deeper into that case and realized that the victims on the case were Dontavius Thomas and Reginald Carter, the brother and cousin of Donovan Thomas.
And you said you began to dig deeper. What else did you do as a part of that investigation?
Once we got into the investigation, we located a suspect vehicle that I knew to be associated with Mr. Mender and his cousin, Wayne Alford.
And what else did you do as a part of the investigation?
We would pull phone records, we got video, we spoke to witnesses, and ultimately were able to charge that case appropriately.
Were there other conflicts that occurred in 2020?
Yes, following that case, I mean, it was, like I said, it was daily. It was constant shootings back and forth between the Summerhill neighborhood of Atlanta and some of the other areas where the YSL associates would hang out. It resulted in murders. It resulted in aggravated assaults. There were numerous incidents.
Now, in 2021, did you learn of the arrest of Rayshawn Bennett?
I did.
And when he was arrested, where was he housed?
At the Fulton County Jail.
And while he was in the Fulton County Jail, did you learn of a stabbing of Mr. Lucci in February of 2022?
I did.
Right. How did you become aware of that incident?
I believe one of the investigators from the Fulton County Jail had mentioned it to me.
Okay. And once you learned about the incident, what, if anything, did you do?
Once I learned about the incident, I inquired about who the suspect was, and I found out that it was a Mr. Jaden Myrick.
When you found out it was Jaden Myrick, what did you do at that point?
I was familiar with Mr. Myrick, so I began to listen to his jail phone calls and look at his jail. In the jail, I don't know if they still do, they used to have tablets they could rent, and they could text friends and family members through the system with the tablets. So I began to review his text messages as well.
And you said you were familiar with Mr. Myrick. How were you familiar with him?
His involvements in the case that we had at the office.
Okay. And we say the office, talking about the Fulton
Fulton County District Attorney's Office.
And in your understanding of who Mr. Myrick was, did you know if he was associated with any gang?
I knew he was a blood gang member that was associated with YSL.
Now, you said that you started looking at their tablets. Were you able to get the contents of that tablet?
No.
The text messages of the tablet?
Well, when you log into the system, you can review their text messages. So I was able to review some of the text messages from that relevant time period.
And have you had the opportunity to review some of those text messages in preparation for your testimony today?
I have.
And let me ask you this. When you first learned that Jaden Myrick was the person who stabbed him, did you know if there was a plan to stab Lucci? Did you know anything about what led up to the actual stabbing?
I did not, which is what led me to review his phone calls and text messages because I was trying to see what had happened.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as Stacy Exhibit 5TT. Tell me if you recognize Stacy Exhibit 5TT.
I do.
How do you recognize Stacy Exhibit 5TT?
These are some of Mr. Myrick's text messages from the jail system.
And were these some of the messages that you looked at when you found out or learned of the stabbing of Mr. Rayshawn Bennett?
They are.
And do they appear to be fair and accurate depiction of some of the messages that you reviewed once you started investigating or looking into the stabbing of Mr. Bennett?
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, this time the state would like to admit Stacy Exhibit 5TT into evidence.
Admitted.
Once you started looking at these messages, what, if anything, did you learn or glean from these messages?
It appeared to me that Mr. Myrick's girlfriend, Ashley Ellison, was acting as a third party for communication with somebody else.
Okay. And once you started looking at determining that Ms. Ellison might be serving as a third party, what did you do at that point?
I began to try and identify the third party and a phone number associated with that party.
And how did you go about doing that?
There were context clues from the text messages. On a text message from February 6th, she says, your folks, this message is from your folks, 706. which is an area code that I know. So I think, okay, maybe that's a clue. Maybe that's the person has a 706 area code. Okay.
And what did the text say?
It does. So Miss Ellison is conveying the message from the 706 area code to Mr. Myrick. And she says, and the person is telling her to tell him, tell Lil Bro, I talked to the biggest, just now waiting on the news. He thinks we're flexing. I talked to the biggest, he thinks we're playing because the racial expletive in the same house and it ain't handled. I done put the food on the table. Make me proud. My name is on the line on this one, so don't make me look bad.
And what was the date and time of that message?
February 9th, 2020 at 11:32 p.m.
Is it 2020?
I'm sorry, 2022.
Okay. And in reading that, did you have an understanding of what they were even talking about?
A basic understanding, yes.
What was your understanding of it?
That they were waiting for confirmation that the act had happened, saying that we think we're flexing, he thinks that we're trying to get one over on them. And they think that they were kidding because I guess they'd been housed together for a little while and nothing had happened up until that point. And he tells them he put the food on the table, like he gave him the opportunity and make me proud.
And once you saw that message, how did you go about determining if 706 was a phone number or what 706 was?
I reviewed Mr. Myrick's jail calls. You can pull jail calls by the inmate themselves. And I looked at his jail calls to see if there are any phone numbers that he had called with a 706 area code.
And were there any phone numbers he had called with a 706 area code?
Yes, there was one.
Now, once you saw the phone number that he had called, what, if anything, did you do about the phone number?
I requested the records for the phone number. I learned that it was a Verizon phone number. When you have Verizon, they retain what is called text message data. As long as it's not an iPhone, if you have an iPhone, as long as it's not iMessage and it's Android to Android or iPhone to Android, for 7 days they will retain the contents of those text messages. So I secured a search warrant and requested the call records as well as the text message content for that phone number from Verizon.
And were you able to get that information?
I was.
And once you received the information, what, if anything, did you do?
I tried to, it just comes in as a big spreadsheet. So I went through and sorted and identified the calls. The texts and read through them.
And when you said you sorted, how did you go about sorting and identifying the text messages?
To make it comprehensible and able to be read, I color-coded the messages from each person so people could kind of track and follow along with what was being said.
And have you had an opportunity to review a copy of a demonstrative showing how you kind of color-coded those text messages to help determine what people were talking?
I have.
Showing you what's been marked as Stacy Exhibit 1 TTB. Do you recognize Stacy Exhibit 1 TTB?
I do.
And how do you recognize Stacy Exhibit 1 TTB?
This is the color-coded version of the spreadsheet that I had made.
And I'm going to show you here States Exhibit 1 TTC1, 1 TTC2, 1 TTC3, and 1 TTC4. Do those appear to be enlargement versions of your color-coded copy of your text messages?
Yes.
During this time, the state would like to tender and admit first States Exhibit 1 TTB and 1 TTC 1 through 4. B as evidence and C 1 through 4 as demonstrative.
All right, those are admitted.
And permission to publish.
You may.
Information when you step down now?
Yes, she may.
So, first, orient the jurors as to the colors and who, when you have dark green, who are you highlighting, light green, the pinks, and the reds. So first, orient the jurors.
Okay. So the greens are going to be.
And talk loud so that everyone can hear you.
Okay. So the greens are going to be members of, or somebody associated would appear to be YSL. So to make it easy, I associated that stuff with green.
Why did you say that it appeared that they were associated with YSL?
Based on the context of the conversation, what was being discussed, how people were being referred to, things like that.
Okay.
The red is going to be a conversation with Ashley Ellison. That's Mr. Myrick's girlfriend. So the darker red, you'll see the originating member. It's going to be Mr. Myrick. And then the lighter, the pink, is going to be Ms. Ellison. And then the yellow was an unknown number that was inserted into the conversation. It was still involved.
And when you went back and started investigating the case, what do you recall what day the stabbing occurred?
February 9th.
So when you went back, why did you start at February 6, 2022?
Because that's what the jail text messages, that's kind of when they had started. So I wanted to go back to get, usually when a crime happens, sometimes it's premeditated, sometimes it's not. But I wanted to catch the planning phase if there was any planning phase.
And did you ever associate any of the other phone numbers, for example, this 404-293-3244, did you ever at some point identify that phone number?
I did.
And who did you identify that phone number to belong to?
That belonged to Demikion Garlington.
And did Demikion Garlington have a nickname?
D, or Little D.
And were you ever familiar with his social media accounts?
I was.
And did he ever go by the social media account Scarface?
He did.
So let's start with, on February 6, 2022, is there a text message from the phone associated with Demikion Garlington to that 706 number?
No, it's going to come from the 706 number to Mr. Garlington.
Okay. And thank you for clarifying that for me. The 706 number, let me ask you this, did you ever identify that individual?
I did.
And who was that?
That's going to be a gentleman that goes by the name Khalif Adams. He's an inmate with the Georgia Department of Corrections. He also goes by the name Bobby Hunt. That's his nickname, his moniker he likes to go after.
And based on your investigation, was he conducting these text messages while he was incarcerated in prison?
He was.
All right. Now, looking at the first message, what is the date and time of the first message?
February 6, 2022 at 10:22 a.m.
10:20 or 19?
19:20, sorry.
Okay, so that's 7:20 p.m.?
Yes.
All right. And what is the text message?
It says, yo.
And is there a response from the phone associate Mr. Garlington to the phone associate Mr. Adams or Bobby?
Yes, Mr. Garlington says, who is this? Or who's this?
Right. And is there a response?
He says, Hunt. Okay.
Now, you have a red call here. What does that signify?
That's going to be a text message from Ashley Ellison, Mr. Myrick's girlfriend.
And who is she communicating with?
She's sending a message to Mr. Hunt, the gentleman in prison.
And what did she say?
She said, hey, this is Red. Sectric Ruby, can you talk? He wanted me to call you.
Now, Sectric, do you know who that is?
Mr. Hunt, that's the nickname that he goes by, Sectric.
And have you ever heard the term, this is Red Sectric Ruby? Do you have heard of that term before?
Yeah, Ruby is a slang term or a name that's given to a female friend or associated blood gang. They go by a Ruby, like Cindy Ruby.
And at any point did Mr. Adams respond to her?
Yes, after a little bit more down the line.
Okay. And just to make it easier, when did he respond to her and what was his response?
Want me to call you? It might have gone through the jail messages. It's hard to explain.
Okay. So then next, on February 6, 2022 at 1951, is there a conversation between Mr. Adams' phone and Mr. Garland's phone?
Yes.
Okay. And just go through that conversation, the next set of conversation.
So, Mr. Garlington says, "What it do, twin?" Mr. Adams, who's been in communication with Mr. Myrick, says, "My little man right there with the F-U-C-K, racial expletive." And Mr. Garlington says, "Oh yeah, where about?" Mr. Adams says, "You know which I'm talking about, right? The singer." And Mr. Garlington says, "Who's locked up?" And Mr. Adams says, 650. To which I know that to be a nickname for Mr. Bennett. He will wear a 650 chain. He goes by 650 boot. He has music. He has a Maybach, 650 Maybach. That's where it comes from. So Mr. Garlington responds, "Oh yeah, need him." And then Mr. Adams says, "My little man gonna call back tomorrow." Mr. Garlington says, "Okay, let me know." Mr. Adams, attempting to use coded language, says, "I'm gonna let you know he's been ready to get an autograph for the game." And then Mr. Garlington says, "Okay, let me know ASAP." To which Mr. Adams responds with,
And when you said he's using coded language, what do you mean?
instead of saying, my buddy's ready to kill him, my buddy's ready to attack him, obviously his contraband phone gets.
Take it again.
Right.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to, if the calls were to get intercepted, when phones get taken, it's an attempt to conceal the activity to the person that receives it.
So they're not really trying to get an actual signature autograph for the guy?
No, I'm not trying to get all graphic.
Okay. Now, after that conversation, is there some conversation between Ms. Ellison's phone and Mr. Adams' phone?
Yes.
Okay. When does that conversation begin, and take the jury through that set of conversation?
It begins on the 7th, and they're talking about trying to put Mr. Myrick in communication with Mr. Adams down in the prison system. They're talking about emailing him, texting him. They're asking about stamps in the Fulton County jail system. You have to purchase stamps, the Fulton stamps, to be able to send and receive text messages. So you may buy 30 stamps that will allow you to send a certain amount. It's not free. So she's asking Mr. Adams for money for stamps from Mr. Myrick because they've used their last, and she's facilitating Cash App or Chime, Apple Pay to get the money to him to be able to facilitate stamps being purchased so they can communicate.
And is that communicating via phone?
It's going to be through the jail.
All right. And then there's a interesting call from a number that you're unaware of.
Correct.
And that was not a part of your investigation, investigating this kind of backup work.
Yeah, it was just somebody trying to, a third party trying to send the money. Maybe somebody didn't want to use their Cash App, get their Cash App locked, or whatever might happen, so somebody else trying to help out.
Okay. And then do they pick up that same conversation trying to get stamps for Mr. Myrick?
Yeah, the unknown number says I sent 15. I'm trying to get in contact with, or Mr. Connolly in the jail. They'll send one inmate may have a Cash App account they're using in the jail, and everybody can send money to, and it might change if somebody's phone gets taken, if the Cash App account gets shut down. So Mr. Adams in this text message sends the $15 to somebody for section, and then he tells Ms. Ellison, I sent the 15, and she says, I got it. I'm going to get the stamps now and tell him to call me. Okay.
Now, going to February 8th, 2022, is there more conversation between Mr. Adams' phone and the Garlington phone?
There it is.
Now showing you what's been admitted as 1TTC2. Is there a conversation between the phone associated with Mr. Garlington and the phone associated with Adams?
There is.
Okay. And what is said on February 8th, 2022?
On February 8th, 2022, there's a message that goes out from Mr. Adams to Mr. Garlington where he says, I talk to little bro. He's going to hit me when the food is done.
And does that mean when the food is actually cooked and finished or something else?
No.
Speculation.
Is this your
Sustained.
Is this your understanding of coded language as well?
It is.
And is your understanding of coded language, does it appear to be coded language?
It does.
All right. Now, is there conversation then between Ms. Allison's phone number or Allison's phone number and Adam's phone number?
Yes.
Okay. Just tell us your generally the date and time and what's the general context of what's going back and forth between them two.
So it starts on February 8th, and you'll see Miss Ellison saying, "Set your phone to tell you Chris got locked back up, and he made the news last night." And he says, "I seen it when it happened. That shit's crazy."
Now, in your understanding, investigator, do you know what they're referencing?
I do.
And what is it?
They are referencing the incident where Christian Eppinger shot Officer David Rogers and was arrested for that. I believe it was on February 7th, so that means that's it.
Okay. Go ahead.
And he says, "See what happened." And Miss Ellison says, "Yesterday." And she's saying that Mr. Myron said, "He said, ain't shorty a rat." And Mr. Adams says, "Tell him to leave that be in him." And Mr. Adams says, "Focus on the bag. F all the other shit we worried about. It's nothing but business." Go ahead. Is this-
The person.
Yeah. No. Okay. Nothing but business. And they start talking about, he says, "Buddy's up under Rico and them. Tell him to bring home the trophy. I'm going to secure the bag. I've been online. Racial expletive. Got to see it to believe it. And Chris being in there is all the confirmation that's going to be needed."
So is that also using some coded language as well?
Some.
And what is your understanding of what's happening in this text message?
Basically tell him focus on the task at hand, and that people are going to get confirmation of it because Eppinger's in there. He's going to be able to vouch for it and say, "No, it's happened. I'm here. It actually happened."
And then does that generally the context that's happening between Ms. Allison passing messages to Myrick from Adam in this February 8th conversation?
It is.
All right. Now going to February 9th, is there any messages between Mr. Adams and Mr. Garland?
He just reaches out to him. To me, it appears that maybe Mr. Garlington may have attempted to call him and he couldn't answer. And he says, "Yo, 12 is on the floor." 12 being a slang term for police. When you're in the prison system, the guards should come around and do rounds. If that's happening, he wouldn't have been able to answer his phone if the call came in.
And then are there conversations between Allison and Adam, also now on February 9th, 2022?
Yes.
Okay. And tell us the general, what's the conversation happening here on February 9th, 2022?
Mr. Adams is engaged in a conversation with Miss Ellison, and he says, "Yo," and she says, "What's up?" And he says, "Tell little bro, I talked to the biggest, just now waiting on the news. They think we're flexing." And she says, "Okay, I'll text this to him."
And go ahead.
And then Mr. Adams says, "My name's on the line on this one. Don't make me look bad." Oh, it's a follow-up. So, yeah, my name's on this line. I'm sorry, the text messages, sometimes they come in a little bit out of order. It says, "My name is on the line. So on this one, don't make me look bad." He said, "I talked to the biggest. He thinks we're playing because the racial expletive is in the same house and it ain't handled. I done put the food on the table. Make me proud."
Now, is this similar to the same text message that you saw in the JPay system when you were first just trying to pull the case? Is that same text message that was in the JPay system?
Yes.
And is that the same text message you read a few moments ago?
Yes.
All right. And is there any further conversation between Ellison and Adams and her passing that information on somebody?
It looks like there was based on the context, there was I think, and there's a phone call that happens where there's a three-way call that's attempting to happen. Isn't great service in most of these prisons. So he wasn't able to hear him. So they're trying to get the message across about what had happened in the payment and things like that. And you'll even see he texted this yellow number. He says, nothing, just trying to get confirmation of this thing.
And is that confirmation, is your understanding that's a confirmation of the stabbing?
Correct.
And what day did the stabbing occur?
May 9th.
May 9th?
I'm sorry, February 9th.
Now, on February 10th, is there some conversation between Ellison's phone and Adams' phone?
There is.
Okay. If you can give the general context of what is now occurring on February 10th, and is this the day after the stabbing?
Yes.
All right. What is happening on the day after the stabbing?
Mr. Myrick, coupled with phone calls, Mr. Myrick is eager to be paid for what he did for stabbing Mr. Bennett. So Ms. Ellison is texting.
Yeah, I mean, I already instructed you once to not include your commentary and just provide the facts.
Can I lay some foundation? Were you able to listen to the jail calls yourself?
I was.
And were you able to pick up tone and manner and demeanor in the calls that you were listening to?
Yes.
And
All right. And so that would be your lay opinion that he, okay.
Yeah.
And based on that, is that how you were determining that he was eager to get paid for what he did to Mr. Bennett?
Correct. That was the purpose of his phone calls, were to seek payment for what he had done.
And were there multiple phone calls for him seeking payment for what he's done?
Yes.
Okay. And with that, Your Honor, may that be?
All right.
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, looking at February 10, 2022, just go through what that conversation was on February 10th, 2022.
She said, do you need the bros to verify? He said that's all. Should be no talking on the phone right now anyway.
And for you as an investigator, was that significant?
It was.
Why?
Because he was seeking payment and talking about, does it need to be verified to secure payment? And they were talking about not talking on the phone right now because of what had just happened.
It being the stabbing that just happened?
Correct.
All right. And when you say not talking on the phone, is that not talking on the jail phones?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Continue.
He's asking, Ms. Ellison said, Mr. Myrick is asking to get something to eat now. He's hungry. And then he again utilizes an outside person to send like $80 to Mr. Myrick.
And that's generally the conversation here, them just trying to get this money, get paid.
Correct.
All right. Now, skipping down to February 10th, is there now some conversation between Garlington and Adams?
Correct.
All right. Tell us about what's happening between Garlington and Adams on February 10th as well.
Mr. Adams is reaching out to Mr. Garlington regarding what appears to possibly be payment for Mr. Myrick. Okay. For the stabbing.
And just go through the text.
Okay. Mr. Adams says, get at me, 3-5. And he says, Mr. Garlington says, okay, when I get off your phone. Mr. Adams says, I'm on your ass. You tried to play me to the left. Then one says, yo. The other says, yo. Mr. Adams says, what you got going? Mr. Garlington says, put him down. And he says, for sure. Like, did he put him down? And he says, are you for sure? Simon says, yo, twin. And again, Mr. Adams reaches out and says, look, just keep me posted so I can make sure little bro gets something because he's on my top bad. And I told him I was going to get him the back end for his show. Got to pay him a couple racks myself to make sure he's in gang. I recognize when they say Jeezy typically means good. I ain't looking for nothing for me. I'm just invested in my artist. Smell me. I need me and mines. Looks like gone. Go and get it done. For sure, slat, I'm out here, hit me gang. And then Mr. Garlington responds, it's hard to get in touch with him. I just be seeing him when I go up there. To the yo. You know I understand that shit, gang. I'm with you, slat.
Ms. Hilton, you don't have to do it right now, but be kind of thinking about when a good lunch break would be.
This is the last one, so I
All
put it right here.
Sounds good.
All right. And while we wrap this up, so we go to lunch. So what is this still on the February 10th, 2022?
Yes, it's a continuation.
Okay, and just go through the last bit of that conversation between Mr. Garlington and Mr. Adams on February 10th.
Mr. Garlington says, okay. And Mr. Adams says, for sure. I know it's going to take time, bro. Bro is bigger than big, and he got to be hands off with everything. We locked in from county to 4-4 ever. Slime, I'm rocking, and mine's going with me. It's all hands on deck.
And does that text message repeat itself?
It does.
All right. And from your investigation and understanding, when he says, for sure, I know it's going to take time, bro, bigger than big, and got to be hands off with everything. We locked in from county to forever slime. Who did you understand they were talking about, given your investigation and content of these text messages?
From my investigation and my knowledge, it sounded like somebody in a leadership role with YSL.
Okay. Did you know specifically who?
It appeared to be Mr. Williams.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Sustained.
And a motion to strike, move to strike that last.
Can I lay some foundation?
You can try.
Okay. How long have you been working back and forth with the YSL gang?
Since 2019 at least, if not 2017.
And when you were working with these cases, did you ever have any other evidence in which individuals from YSL, from your own investigation, attempted to conceal Mr. Williams' identity?
Yes.
And how have you seen that occur?
With the use of FaceTime to conceal his identity, so text messages or phone calls go undetected.
Okay. Have you ever seen in your investigation or listening to jail calls that individual YSL will try not to use his name?
Correct.
Okay. Have you ever seen through social media where individuals will try to conceal and say, don't say his name, say a different name?
Correct.
Right. And in having that knowledge and reading this text message, is that how you determine, it is of your expert opinion, that this could be potentially talking about Mr. Williams?
Well, objection to leading, and it's also a misstatement of what was said initially. Says, in her opinion, it's Mr. Williams.
All right.
Could be Mr. Williams.
I'm going to let you clear that up on cross.
I originally
answer.
said somebody with a leadership role. I can't definitively say Mr. Williams. I said somebody within a leadership role, so that's who is in the highest leadership role. So.
All right. No, I think this would be a good time.
Okay.